Yeah, those were all some of my job rejections from over the last couple of years. It's a lot. But if you clicked on this video, you already know that. This is not going to be about whether or not the job market is rough and why that might be. This is specifically about how to cope. As someone who's a career mentor and has also been through their own fair share of rounds of redundancies and job hunting, I came up with the rejection protocol for me to follow every single time the dreaded R word came up. Don't worry, this is going to be a little bit more insightful than that scrappy first draft that you just saw there. And do you want to know why we really need to learn how to cope? Because of this stat right here from a Mercer report that found 9 in 10 leaders set restructuring as one of their top priorities. Now, even though that was from 2017, there's been a new report in 2026 that shows basically the same thing, that nearly 9 out of 10 HR leaders say their organization has already conducted or is planning to conduct redundancies in the next 12 months. Just from my own experience, I can absolutely see this playing out. The last couple of organizations that I've worked for over the last 7 or 8 years have had probably 5 or 6 mass restructures and redundancies in that time. If redundancies are going to stay really common, we need to learn how to be agile. We need to expect workplace rejection to a certain degree, and we need to build resilience for getting through that. Okay, so this isn't going to be doom and gloom, and it's not going to be toxic positivity either. It's just going to be practical, actionable advice that you can use so that you can take rejection with resilience and without spiraling. And this will become clear soon as well. So we're going to go back to that scrappy rejection protocol that I wrote many years ago and have used many times since, and have given friends to use as well. I've actually moved some of the steps around since that initial version on the scrap of paper that you saw earlier, so ignore that for now. There is still 3 steps to it, and the last step is in 3 parts. Okay, firstly, I need you to wallow. Do not skip this step just because it sounds airy-fairy. Feeling sorry for yourself and actually leaning into that a little bit is really important. Social rejection actually shows up in the body neurologically the same as physical rejection does. They genuinely share the same neural circuits. Now, granted, it hasn't been tested in a work or job hunting context. It's been tested as feeling socially excluded more broadly. But I think there's an argument to be made that getting rejected from a job feels very similar. It feels like you're being rejected from this particular life that you wanted. There is a little bit of research into the psychological effect of being rejected when job hunting, but unfortunately it's behind a paywall and I don't have institutional access at the moment. So we're going to go with the research that says that social pain is the same as physical pain. And what do you do when you're in physical pain? You look after yourself. I like to give myself the rest of that day or evening, because if your pity party lasts too long, then you run the risk of it just becoming your permanent state of mind. And that's not helpful for anyone. So acknowledge it, feel it, move through it. Tell people about it so that you don't have that weird shame association, you know, like Brené Brown talks about. Shame can't survive being spoken. It needs that silence and that secrecy to allow that self-judgment to thrive. So tell people if you can, or have a night to yourself, have a cry, whatever you need to do. Just make sure that you feel the feelings you're feeling. Step 2, closure. We're probably on the next day now. So even though you're not going to want to do this, you need to reply to that rejection email. And this is twofold. First, it's a potential growth opportunity for you. We'll come back to that in a bit. And secondly, it can reinforce the organization's positive perception of you for potential future opportunities. So you're going to keep it concise and polite, and you're going to say something along the lines of, "Dear hiring manager, thank you for letting me know the outcome of the application process. I'd love to be considered for future opportunities at X company. So if there's any feedback that you could share that might strengthen those future applications, I'd really appreciate it. Yours sincerely." This shows that you can stay professional and polite in the face of disappointment, and it clearly conveys that you would like to be considered again in the future. Planting that little nugget now might help you set a positive tone for if you do get a future interview with them. Or if anything goes wrong with the candidate that they went with this time, for example, they back out or they don't pass their probation period, then you never know. The company might come back to you because you've shown that your interest in working for them is sustained beyond that rejection. And if nothing like that comes from it, then you've still given yourself that closure, that feeling of closing the door on the idea that that job was a possibility for a new future life for you. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, just to set some expectation management here, more often than not, your email probably will be ignored. Or you might get a generic response saying they can't provide personal individual feedback. Last year, I made it through to the final 10 from an initial 900 applicants. I'd gone through 3 or 4 rounds, including a paid work afternoon, and they still told me that they couldn't provide individual feedback. Yeah. But Sometimes you do get lucky. I have had some genuinely helpful insights though, particularly from smaller companies that have said things like, well, your cover letter mostly focused on X, but what we were really looking for was Y. Or candidates that made it through all the way demonstrated this particular trait or experience, which you didn't have. And sometimes that's nice validation to just be like, okay, well, that's out of my control. I don't actually possess that experience, so I guess it didn't make sense for me to get the job in this context. Or it can give you food for thought for things to do differently or change or improve next time, which is kind of what I mean by this being a potential growth opportunity for you as well. Which brings us back to this. Kind of. So I recently read this book called Squiggly Careers. I'm not sponsored or affiliated with the book. I'm just a longtime fan of the authors and the career advising business that they built. There were some really interesting ideas in that book about this growth opportunity aspect that we were just talking about. Helen and Sarah talk about this thing they call confidence demons. It's all about how our perception of our strengths and weaknesses really shape how we view interactions and feedback. So Sarah gives an anecdote about coming out of a meeting that she thought was incredibly hostile and full of conflict. And then she talked to a colleague who came out of the same meeting, and they actually felt relieved that it had been a very direct and transparent interaction rather than seeming positive but there being underlying subtext. And then she goes on to talk about what caused this difference in perception between the two of them that had come out of the exact same meeting as part of the wider context of how we view interactions and feedback through a lens that we create ourselves. And I think the same is true for job rejections. We all need to be a bit better at taking a job rejection at face value rather than seeing it as a deeper comment on our self-worth. At best, it can be nothing personal. There can be a million reasons that an organisation chooses someone else, even if you were a great candidate. And at worst, if they did have specific critiques, use that as an opportunity to grow and improve for future applications, while also knowing it doesn't mean that you aren't good enough as a person. So the book then talks about how this all fits in with this wider shift that people are finding fulfillment through work, and that is leading to people tying their jobs to their personal identity as opposed to just their income. And along with that, they talk about the pros and cons and some research that shows that between 30 and 50% of people, depending on what generation, now prioritise job purpose and satisfaction over pay and titles. I'll probably do a whole video about the thoughts that I had while I was reading this book at some point, so let me know if you think that would be interesting. And in the meantime, back to the rejection protocol. Step 3, the final step. Positive, practical, and productive. Okay, so positive, I do all the things that I know are going to put me in a better mindset. I go to bed at a decent time, I meditate when I get up in the morning, I get outside, I make some nice social plans. Basically, you need to just do all the things that you know for you are going to put you in a good headspace. Whatever they are, make a conscious effort to do them. Okay, practical. Tell yourself tangible facts that are going to stop you from spiraling. These are going to be different for each person. It might be reminding yourself of how many steps there are before you actually get to your worst case scenario. It might be looking at anything actionable from the feedback like we just talked about. I'd write these down, and it can be anything that helps stop you jumping to worst case scenario in your head. Remember that anticipating something bad happening in the future and panicking about that can mean that you're suffering through it twice. Those things might not actually happen. I know that this is a really hard place to pull yourself from because it's really scary when you need income and it feels like you're not getting anywhere with getting a job. I do get that. But as much as you can, try and reassure yourself using the actual real life practical facts of your current scenario and not the future one that you're dreading. Productive. This does not mean jumping straight into more job applications. If I were you, if you can, I'd give yourself a couple of days before you do that, particularly if it's been a big rejection from a job that you really wanted or you got really far in the process. Here I actually mean being productive elsewhere. So whether that means in your current job, going to the gym, tackling your life admin list. You're not going to feel like doing this, but if you don't do it, you're going to get to the end of the week and feel worse because you're behind and overwhelmed on those things as well. Stick with me because we're not quite done yet. Well, we're done with the rejection protocol and we're done with a tiny version of the book that I was just talking about. Because how doom and gloom can a video be if crafting a tiny book is involved? But what we're not done with yet is what you should do next. You've made it through this particular rejection, but where do we go from here? So I'll link all my other advice videos, which should be helpful. But on top of that, I do genuinely think this book is a really good next step, particularly to make sure you're on the right track with moving forward with what you're applying for and what kind of career you're building for yourself. I actually think it would work really well in conjunction with my videos, particularly sections 3 and 6 in this book, because they talk about values alignment and future possibilities. And my content is all about finding future focused work that aligns with your values, particularly if you want to feel like you're making a difference in the world. And in the context of job hunting, they also go on to talk about how the workplace as we know it is changing. They use this acronym of VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But they don't talk about it negatively necessarily. They just talk about it factually, as if relaying exactly what's happening. And I find that really useful because it then leads into this discussion about the changes that has caused for companies who are hiring. They explain this new project-based approach and building nimble, agile teams, although those are corporate buzzwords, I appreciate. But most importantly, they talk about what it means for applicants and how job seekers should adjust, particularly because we don't even know what jobs are going to be here in 10 years necessarily. So there's a lot of good information about how we can craft our careers around all that uncertainty. So like I said, this genuinely wasn't sponsored in any way. I just do think it's a really good resource. And also look at all of my other videos. And sending love to anyone going through a rejection right now, because it really sucks, but you got it. I'll see you in the next one.